Hey, before we begin, I want to thank the sponsor of today's episode, RevenueCat. RevenueCat has made it easier for app developers to build, analyze, and grow in-app purchases and subscriptions on iOS, Android, and the web. There's no server code required. With a few lines of code, get in-app purchase infrastructure, analytics, and integrations without managing servers. When you're building an app, you want to focus on your app, the design, the look, and being able to take a look at how your users are using your app. What RevenueCat does is it takes that burden away. It makes in-app purchases easier. With their automated reporting tools, you get out-of-the-box analytics for key subscription metrics. This gives you the insight you need to grow your app. There's subscription analytics, customer lists, filters and segments, and all sorts of plugins with different APIs so you can get started and analyze your customers and get a hold of them today. Focus on your app and your design. Go to RevenueCat.com to check out how to get started today, as well as their YouTube channel in the link below. They show you how to get started whether you want to use a CocoaPod or Swift package and integrate RevenueCat into your app. Also, you'll want to check out my episode with Andy, who talks about some of the new stuff that's come out with StoreKit 2. Now, it may make it a lot easier for you, but RevenueCat is going to make sure that you have that long-term growth and being able to look at how your app works and how subscriptions can be used and utilized for greater income. Try RevenueCat today, and thank you again, RevenueCat, for sponsoring today's episode. Welcome to another episode at Empower Apps. I'm your host, Leo Dion. Today, I'm joined by Gui Rambo. Hey, Gui, thank you for coming on. This is third time, I think, I've had you on.
Yeah, thanks for having me again, Leo. I think you're right. Yeah, third time.
So, I forgot, first time we talked about building apps, future-proofing apps. Last time we were going to talk about AV Foundation, but we just glowed about the new M1 processors. Luckily, did you get a new Mac?
It's on the way, yes. The M1 Max 14-inch MacBook Pro.
Okay, I'm not getting a Pro. I'm waiting for the new iMac. So luckily, we won't be talking about that today. We'll actually be talking about some of the work you've done with AirBuddy, and then, yeah, we'll get into Bluetooth and how AirPods work. But before we get into that, I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, so I'm a Mac and iOS developer. I'm based in Brazil, and through my company, I develop a few apps. My main product at the moment being AirBuddy, which, as you know, is this little app that helps people interact with their AirPods and other Apple and Beats headsets on macOS, which, as you know, is more complicated than it should. And I'm sure we'll unpack that.
I am a big fan of AirBuddy. I love it. So I have iPad 5, 6, one of those. I have the iPhone SE. I have an iPhone 8. I have my 11 Pro Max, my main personal phone, and then I have a 11 as well. So I have a few iOS devices, and then I have the 2 Apple Watches that I own. And just AirBuddy is perfect for keeping track of battery when we have someone who wants to borrow one of these devices to play a game or something like that. I got to make sure they're charged. So I'm loving AirBuddy, and I love the stuff that it does with the AirPods as well. So thank you for that. It's a fantastic app. If people haven't tried it, definitely give it a try. Notifications. That's been really good feature as well that I'm a big fan of. So thank you for the work on that.
Yeah. Thanks for using it. I'm glad it's useful. I knew I was reaching the right public when, the little list that shows all of your devices. Yeah. So used to have like a maximum height, and then it would scroll. And I got like a couple of people requesting that I made the list expand to fit all of the devices, which I had reached that point with my list of devices because I do have a lot of devices here. But I personally didn't think about that. But then a few people were like, hey, I have a lot of devices. Could you make the list grow up to as tall as would fit on screen, please? And, okay.
Wow. So have you gotten any bug reports about it being notch safe? I assume it is, right? Like as long as you don't have don't have too many like icons up there, you're probably fine.
Yeah, the thing that bothers me is that currently there are some bugs with macOS on the new Macs where it will hide some of the status items depending on how many menus you have and the
Wow.
size of the screen and the position of the notch. So if things grow too much, you might end up in a situation where the AirBuddy icon is like behind the notch, and
Oh
that's
no.
not an AirBuddy thing. That's like any menu bar app thing. But I'm
Right,
sure
right.
Apple will figure something out, and I'm really happy for the folks who make Bartender because I'm
Yes.
sure their app
Yes.
is getting a lot more traction now thanks to these Macs. And I personally have never used Bartender myself, but I'm currently looking at adopting it once I get my new MacBook Pro.
Do you have a lot of icons at the top?
I don't. Currently, I have Dropbox, which I probably shouldn't. I have AirBuddy Camo, which I'm using for the webcam. Raycast, Postgres, Sim Genie, a great app to manage iOS simulators, and 1Password. That's
Okay.
like the third-party ones, and then I have like the volume, Wi-Fi,
Right.
and all the good stuff.
Yeah, I got rid of a lot of like system ones because I just don't care, except for maybe like Bluetooth and sound. Well, sound moved over, which is really nice. But like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I'll have like a few other ones that I might use now and then, but I try to keep it minimal. Of course, I'm on a 27-inch, so it's not as big of a deal. But
Yeah, Control
yeah,
Center is great. I love the fact that they brought that to the Mac because it just has so many things in there that you have to access every now and then. Opening system preferences would be too much of a hassle, but having the icon there would also be too much of inconvenience to have that all the time. So being able to have Control Center there with all of the modules that you want to control every now and then is really great. And I really wish Apple would let us developers add stuff to Control Center. I think that could be an elegant solution for the problem of no menu bar space for all of your menu bar items.
yeah, they need to add
But
like an ellipsis or something, or like
yeah,
a way to set preferences, especially with the notch, right? It's like you
mhm.
need to be able to set priority on stuff that you want to show up at the top. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But I
Um
think they don't look at Control Center as anyone else's
right.
playground to play with. It's been like on iOS since forever, and they never allowed third-party apps to add modules to Control Center. So don't think that's happening anytime soon, unfortunately.
Yeah. So before we begin, I wanted to ask, so you're wearing the Max, right? The AirPods Max right
Hmm.
now. How do you like them?
Yes. Oh, I love them, and I'm using them wired. I prefer to use them that way when I'm doing these types of recordings. I also use it wired when I'm editing Stacktrace, which is my podcast with John Sandell, and I am the editor for that podcast. So I like to use them with the little wire, the stupid wire that I had to pay like $500 for. So no, it's not that expensive, but it's expensive for a wire.
Do you have to buy it from
S-
Apple?
you do.
Oh, okay.
There are probably third-party ones by now, but when I first got the AirPods Max, the Apple one was the only option,
Yeah.
basically. But yeah, even though I had to get the wire separately, I think it's a really good device, and like most people don't need the wired option, so it kind of makes sense that it's not an included thing because
Yeah.
yeah, I think most people won't use it. But for this type of work, like so that I can hear myself in real time and then hear you at the same time while we're recording, I think this is great.
Yeah. And I assume you need that to keep the audio in sync for editing and recording and things like
Hmm.
that and quality. So
Yeah.
before we get into the API stuff, I'm just curious on your opinion on AirPods in general. Did you get the AirPods 3 by any chance?
They are on the way, not here
Okay.
yet.
So I had a pair of AirPods 3. I was not a fan.
Mm.
I like them. They're fine, but I am a big fan of the pros that I'm wearing now. I like the little plastic tip. More so like I like the plastic tip more so than like the noise canceling and stuff. Like to me, they just fit a lot better. And for me, the AirPods 3 just like were not a great fit. Like I like the
Hmm.
size, I like that they're small, but like even the AirPods 1, I feel like have a better fit than the AirPods 3 do. Um, but what pairs do you own?
Uh, all of them,
Yeah, I guess for
multiples.
software
Uh,
testing. Yeah,
Yeah, so I have a bunch of old AirPods, the first generation, second generation, and of course I also have the Pros. I think I have like 4 pairs of the AirPods Pro, and of course on a day-to-day basis I only use 1 pair of the AirPods Pro, but I have others for testing because I keep a pair in another paired with another iCloud account. And
gotcha.
there's also like I was really glad that I had more than 1 pair because Apple during this beta season released a beta of the AirPods Pro firmware. So I wouldn't have the guts to put that into my main daily carry. So I was able to flash the beta firmware to a secondary pair that I could test with and see if it broke anything with AirBuddy and also test the new features. So yeah, I have all of them and usually more than one. And the AirPods 3 are on the way here so that I can do some additional testing. But from the initial testing done by my users and some friends with AirPods 3 and AirBuddy, it seems to be working just fine.
Yeah, it worked great. I think the only issue I had was the icon needs to be updated, I think.
Yeah, yeah,
But that was
that's also fixed already. You
yeah, I'm
probably
sure
got
it
it on
is.
day one, and
Yes.
the updates went out the day after the first day of the AirPods 3 on the market.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I want to maybe you can kind of explain the like I want to get into like the technical details of AirPods, how they work, what kind of stuff have you found out working with AirBuddy, um, as far as like how AirPods work and how the communication works and Bluetooth and all that stuff. Maybe you can get into the guts of that.
Oh, that's fun. We could be here for hours.
So what's the, how about this? What's the biggest thing you've learned working on AirBuddy when it comes to AirPods? There, I'll start that way.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is that I didn't know much about Bluetooth when I went into this project, and throughout my years working on it, I've come to learn a lot about how Bluetooth works under the hood. Not even close to all of it, and I have, I would say, superficial understanding of most of the stack, but it's such a complicated technology that I would say it's extremely unlikely that any one engineer is going to know everything there is to know about Bluetooth because it is a very complicated technology. And I came to love it and hate it at the same time because it can be very frustrating sometimes.
Yeah, we did an episode with Leah last year, a couple of years ago. She did a presentation at Swift Heroes on Bluetooth and kind of the history of it. So I'm really curious, like more focusing on the like the Swift. I assume did you do most of the code in Swift?
Yep. The first version of AirBuddy, which I released in early 2019, was mostly Objective C, but
Okay.
I migrated like it's probably like 95% Swift now.
Okay. So like I'm really curious from like an API standpoint, like what you've learned as far as the best way to like create an app that uses Bluetooth. And like especially dealing what I've found like really challenging with Bluetooth is managing all these like different services and characteristics and things like that, and then making sure like oh like I'm losing communication here, or like how to handle certain errors, things like that maybe would be a good way to kind of get somebody equiated used to using the core Bluetooth API.
I'm not a native speaker, so I won't be able to help you there. So,
Whatever the Portuguese
uh,
word for it.
honestly I don't know. But so with the API side of things, I think the API is fine. Like Core Bluetooth is a fine API. Of course, it feels kind of old because the only option you have with it is to use delegation, and it
Yes.
makes
Yeah.
heavy use of delegation. And it's heavily asynchronous in nature due to the nature of
Okay.
Bluetooth communications. So most app developers are used to dealing with network requests and things like that, which are usually you send a request and eventually you get a response or an error back. And with Bluetooth, it's not that simple because just
Okay.
making a request in the first place, and I'm saying request in terms of exchanging some data with an external device. It's not that how it works. Like it's not, you don't make requests. But even getting to the point where you can do the request takes several steps, which are
Yes.
all highly asynchronous and have a high likelihoods of failure. So you have to keep all of that in mind when you're working on this sort of stuff. And the best way to deal with that I found was to just abstract the hell out of it. Like really hide the intricacies of
Yeah.
Bluetooth communication from your higher level code, basically. So if you have an UI that you want to display something from a device, that's fine, but don't have any knowledge of Bluetooth in your UI layer or even the layer below that. Try
Yeah.
to keep the core Bluetooth, and I say that both in terms of the core code dealing with Bluetooth and the core Bluetooth code. Keep all of that as isolated as possible and try to create as nice an abstraction as you can on top of it. I feel like that's the recipe for success. If you start dealing with CB peripherals or CB central managers in your view controllers, I mean, that's fine for demos and testing, but you're going to be in a world of pain if you try to ship that in a real app.
I attempted to create an app in Swift UI and was like trying to abstract all that stuff away. But then like you said, there's like such a hierarchy of error handling and just like different things that you have to deal with a Bluetooth that made it so complicated. And like I like that your approach was like abstraction, because I think like, yeah, you want all the Bluetooth techie part like kind of way from your UI, and like you want to manage that somewhere else, kind of what you're saying, right?
Yeah, and there are so many different ways that you can use Bluetooth, and so many ways that devices can interact with each other. Your Mac is or your iOS device is usually behaving as the central device, so it's going to be communicating with peripherals, which can be heart rate monitors or an Apple Watch or whatever device you can imagine. And the ways that you interact with these devices can be many different ways, and some devices will require you to do different types of communication with the same device, and that's where the multi-layer aspect of Bluetooth comes to mind. So you might have a device where all you have to do is read whatever the manufacturer data of the Bluetooth advertisement is, and you parse that. That's how AirPods work in the context of AirBuddy, basically. It's just listening for your AirPods advertising and parsing the data that they send out. That's the simplest form of Bluetooth Low Energy communication, where you're basically just observing the devices around you and displaying data about them. But then there's other types of devices where you have to do that, but also connect to the device and write a value to a characteristic that represents a command. So say you
Okay.
have like a media player and it has like the command service and the opcode characteristic, and you send 0xAA to play and pause, for instance. So you have to deal with that, and it might write to another characteristic to tell you if it's currently playing, what the track is playing now, and things like that. And then you have other other layers like the A2DP layer, which is a way for you to open a stream of data between Bluetooth devices, which is lower level but more flexible and better for real-time things. So
Where's
as you
that
can see,
used in?
there's that's used in AirPods, for instance. They use that
Eh,
for commands such as changing listening modes and things like that.
Gotcha. Okay.
And many devices use that. So A2DP, you can use it. You can have multiple channels that can be opened at the same time, and you can use each channel for different types of data streams. So yeah, that can be used for that sort of stuff. So as you can see, it can become really complicated depending on which device it is that you're wanting to talk to, and the way you have to interact with the device will highly depend on the device itself. So if you're writing an app, let's say you work at some fitness company and they have like a little fitness band, and you want to make an iOS app for the fitness band, you're gonna have to be working with the team that makes the actual hardware and the firmware for the fitness band. And that's how you're gonna learn how it works and what type of data you have to send it and what type of data it can send to you.
Yep.
So it's highly dependent on the hardware that you're talking to.
Yeah, that's what I've found. I mean, I've worked on projects with exercise devices, and that was it. It's like you work closely with that team as they're building the exercise equipment and figure out, they were communicating with me. Here's a characteristic code. Here's the service code, etc. And like, yeah, that's kind of the way to do it. Are there some like good resources out there where you were able to find out like certain codes or certain characteristics? And how standard are they, I guess?
You do have a set of predefined services and characteristics. I guess we should maybe explain quickly what that means for people who are
Yes.
not familiar with Bluetooth. So with Bluetooth Low Energy, which we call BLE, you have basically a tree structure that represents all of the characteristics, and I'm not saying Bluetooth characteristics, I mean what a device has, and is structured in services, characteristics, and descriptors. So you can think you can think of services as like folders, and the characteristics are files, and descriptors are the metadata for the files, basically.
Okay.
And some devices will have just one service and one characteristic, and that's it. So others will have multiple services, and a given service can have lots and lots of characteristics within the service. And the characteristics can have descriptors that you use to configure and learn about those characteristics. And there are a set of standardized services and characteristics. You can find that on the Bluetooth website, Bluetooth assigned numbers.
Okay.
But many devices will use custom ones. And Apple devices have lots of custom ones, and other third-party devices also will have different services and characteristics. So there is one example of a standard service is a device information service. And inside the device information service, you have a characteristic for device model, for instance. And iOS devices, they implement a service. So you can find out, like, if you find a nearby iOS device that's broadcasting over BLE, you can find out what model of iPhone that is based on reading that characteristic within the device information service. There's also a battery service that devices can broadcast, which is a standardized one, and they will broadcast battery level and battery state. But in general, most devices will have at least one custom service with custom characteristics, and Apple devices are no exception.
How did you debug some of those characteristics, or what tools did you use, and like how did you figure out what you were looking for?
Yeah, so with AirPods specifically, I don't deal much with that layer because the way I talk to AirPods on the Mac in terms of actually doing stuff with them, like changing listening modes and things like that, is done through slightly higher level API.
Okay.
And the commands such as changing listening modes and things like that are done through A2DP, but I don't have to go down to that layer because there are APIs on macOS that will do that for you. But in terms of actually finding the devices nearby and getting battery information and things like that, that's all Bluetooth Low Energy advertisements. So I don't even have to open a Bluetooth Low Energy connection to the device. I can just get the little packets, which is usually like 29 bytes or something.
Okay.
And that
Just
has all of the
decode it.
information that I need, to decode that. And there are some additional things that I have to do to like figure out if the device is paired or not and find out what the address of the device is, because
Okay.
Bluetooth, core Bluetooth doesn't expose device addresses to you. So I have to do some trickery to find out what the MAC address, the Bluetooth MAC address of the AirPods is. And through that, I can figure out what name you have set them to and if they're paired with your Mac and whatnot.
So I wanted to get into some tech support questions that I had and some of the folks in our audience have. So why does, and what's the best way to handle if I'm listening to my AirPods? Well, now I'm not, I'm using the mic obviously, but like there are most instances when I'm having my AirPods on, I'm also using it as a mic and there's audio quality differences. Do you know why that is?
I don't know the underlying technical details, but it's basically because you have to change the audio codec that's being used in order to enable the microphone. And I believe with Bluetooth 5, that's not entirely necessary, but I could be wrong. So it's definitely possible that in the future we won't have that problem. And a problem many iOS developers face, which has been plaguing us since AirPods have become a thing, is when you have your AirPods connected to your Mac, sometimes when you launch the iOS simulator, for some reason, it will engage the microphone on the AirPods, and if you're listening to music on your Mac, it will drop the quality of the music.
That's weird.
Yeah.
Like what I end up doing is I just pick like the internal mic, like just to make sure like my audio like quality stays good when I'm listening to music and working on stuff.
That's what AirBuddy does for you, basically. So there is this feature on AirBuddy, and it's on by default, where if you connect your AirPods to your Mac, it will attempt to switch the microphone input away from your AirPods.
Nice.
It does that for you. But of course, if you want to join a video conference with your AirPods, that might not be ideal. Yeah. But AirBuddy has connection modes, so you can configure different connection modes, and when you connect, you can pick, like I have one that I call meeting, basically, and that will enable transparency mode and enable the microphone.
Nice.
So it helps you with that as well, but it's not enough sometimes because it doesn't handle when you are actively using your AirPods with your Mac and some other event causes the microphone to engage, such as, I don't know, launching the iOS simulator, for instance. So it doesn't do like constant mic input switching. It just does it at the time of connection. And I do have feature requests for it to do that constantly. But as you might imagine, there are challenges there because what if you actually want to enable the microphone? It can become a little bit of a chicken and egg situation where, like, yeah, I noticed that the microphone has switched to the AirPods, but how do I know if that was intentional or if that was just some fluke? Yeah.
I hate the auto switching. Like that's my biggest pet peeve is like, especially when I've got a kid playing on the iPhone and all of a sudden my music goes away, but now I hear their game and it's like, that's not a really well-baked feature.
Can we talk about auto switching?
Yes,
I really hate that feature.
I hate it.
Like I really, really hate it. Not only because it causes trouble to me personally when I'm trying to use my devices, but also because I get blamed by issues caused by auto switching. So, when you have auto switching enabled and you're using your Mac with your AirPods on, it will constantly be showing you that annoying notification, so-and-so AirPods Pro nearby, so-and-so AirPods Pro
I
nearby,
hate
all
that. I hate
the
it.
freaking time. And you can't disable them. There is absolutely no
So
way to disable
the
the
nearby prompt
notifications.
you can't disable.
How? Tell me.
No,
You're gonna
I'm
change my
asking.
life.
So it's the prompt.
Oh, I
It's
thought
the
you
prompt.
were. You're gonna tell me how to disable
No.
them.
So the prompt, I'm asking the prompt you can't disable, but you can disable
No.
auto switching.
Yeah. Auto switching you can totally disable, and when you disable auto switching, the prompt also goes away. After Apple introduced this feature, I got, you wouldn't believe how many support emails I got of people. I got like one person was super angry. They were like, "You are throwing this fake notification. It's not even a real notification. You're faking a notification so that I can't disable it. You suck." Like, no, I'm not. This is the system that's messing with you. So yeah, I really hate it.
I don't like. It's not practical, especially when you have multiple people using devices. That's my biggest thing is like I'll have somebody playing a game and all of a sudden I'm listening to the darn game that's like being played in the other room and I'm like, it's not your fault.
Yeah, and it happens on the Apple TV now with tvOS 15, since tvOS 15. So sometimes I'll have like my boyfriend is going to be upstairs watching some movie and I'm going to go downstairs to like do the laundry or something using my AirPods. And then later he'll be like, "Oh, your AirPods kept popping up on the Apple TV."
Because there's a notification on the Apple TV.
Yep, there is.
That's so stupid.
Really annoying. So the way auto switching works, or doesn't work in this case, is the devices will keep a low level data connection to the AirPods at all times. Okay. So you will have your AirPods connected to both your iPhone, your Mac, and your iPad, as long as they're nearby, of course. They're gonna stay connected. They will have this low level data connection. And there's a system there's a daemon on the system that will be looking for the state of your AirPods to determine based on several heuristics when it might want to switch from one device to the other. And it just doesn't work. And the way it's supposed to work, at least the way I would implement it, would be to check if the device is currently idle. So if you have your AirPods and you're not currently playing any music on them or playing or using the microphone or anything like that, which are things you can observe. If you open the pop-up window in AirBuddy, you'll see that it tells you currently listening to music or currently playing using the microphone. And the way I would do it is if they aren't doing any of that, then I would offer the user the option to switch. I would offer a way to disable those notifications because they can become annoying. I know many people who use their AirPods Pro with noise canceling on, and just that, they're not playing anything. They don't want to play anything. They just want to use the noise cancellation feature. Yeah. And if you do that nowadays with auto switching on, you will see that pop up like dozens of times within a minute, wanting you to connect your AirPods. And something else that I noticed is if there's whatever minor glitch in the Bluetooth stack, so anything that causes like the Bluetooth stack to kind of do a little reset or they lose the AirPods for a second or so, the system that handles the auto switching will get confused and it will think that your AirPods were gone and that they're back and will show you the notification. So it was really badly implemented. And I feel like I would guess that like probably 90% of issues that people have with AirPods are related to auto switching in some way or another.
Right.
So disable auto switching everywhere.
Yeah, which sucks because you have to like go to every device and do it. So the other question I had is I use the music app, and when I go to the little AirPlay icon, I posted this in the docs, but like, what's the difference between selecting the AirPods and selecting the Mac, which is playing the music? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, so you have your AirPods connected to your Mac, and then in music, it will show your Mac and the
Yes.
AirPods
Yes.
and the AirPods as a standalone device. I
Yes.
think that's just it's basically a product of how I think it's called the media remote system works. So
Okay.
media remote is this protocol that Apple devices use to know what's playing on another device, and so that you can like tell something to play on a HomePod or skip tracks on a HomePod and things like that. Because if you look at the music app, it'll also show you HomePods. Although the Mac also shows them now, but
Right.
it
Or it
didn't
shows
used to be
another
the
Mac
case.
now, right? Because Monterey, you can
Yeah.
AirPlay to another Mac,
Yeah.
I guess. So yeah.
Yeah, and that's also done all through media remotes. That's the system. And the way it works is that it will group multiple devices together. So if your Mac is playing to your AirPods, you can think of like your Mac your Mac and your AirPods become a quote AirPlay destination. It's not AirPlay. It's just the way to explain it. So whenever you like grouped, let's say you're playing something on a HomePod, not a stereo pair, and then you also check like another HomePods, they kind of become a single device that groups both HomePods. It's kind of like the same thing, but of course it shouldn't show up in the UI like that because it's kind of exposing the underlying implementation details, and you shouldn't have to care about it. But that's the best way I can explain it. I'm pretty sure that's what's happening there.
So we had a question from Wanted Chaos 1. How does Apple handle 5 or more Bluetooth audio outputs via the audio MIDI setup multi-output device? Isn't Bluetooth 5 technically only capable of 2 concurrent streams?
Yeah, that is true. Bluetooth 5.0 can do things such as 2 concurrent streams. So if you have, say...
Which AirPods support Bluetooth 5?
I'm not entirely sure, to be honest. I think the H1 chip is Bluetooth 5. I could definitely be wrong.
I just wanted to address that.
Yeah. I believe the H1 chip is already Bluetooth 5, but don't quote me on that.
We'll put it in the notes.
So it can do 2 concurrent streams. So for instance, let's say devices that are composed of multiple parts, such as AirPods, which have the left and right bud, you can do a stream for each bud separately instead of doing the way it works now, which is one bud will be the primary and we will stream to the secondary. I think that's still how they work. I don't think Apple is using any of the Bluetooth 5 stuff. So that's a really long way to say that I don't know how they do that. Some crazy multiplexing thing. We also have to keep in mind that H1 is a custom SoC, so we don't really know what they're doing in there. There could be some extensions on top of the standard Bluetooth 5. Well, of course, there are custom protocols on top of it, but there could be some other tricks that they're doing in order to enable that.
Right.
But I haven't tried it out myself. I should definitely try that. It's been a while since I opened Audio MIDI setup here on my Mac.
Yeah, same here. So we had a couple of questions, or one big question, I guess, from Gilbert. He asks, I'd love to unwrap what I perceive as a constant decline in Apple wireless audio connection reliability, particularly devices with H1 chips. I own first generation, second generation AirPods, AirPods Pro, Pro Beats Pro, Power Beats Pro, AirPods Max, and now Beats Fit Pro, all with issues except very first AirPods. It doesn't seem to be just me and not my own selection bias, as more and more people are complaining about things like one side not pairing, desyncing, random disconnects. So I'd love to know if there's something to it and get a better understanding of the technical reasons.
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I think there are many different factors at play here. One of them definitely is auto switching, like we mentioned. I think when people talk about random disconnects, they're probably talking about auto switching misbehaving. That's usually the underlying culprit from my experience. Like sometimes I'll be listening because I do leave auto switching enabled on one of my Macs and on my iPhone because I have to make sure that AirBuddy will work as well as it can with auto switching. And sometimes I'll be listening to a podcast with my AirPods Pro on my iPhone, and I'll pause the podcast to focus on an email or something. And then 2 minutes later, I'll go and press play on my iPhone, and it'll take like 15 seconds to start playing again because in the meantime, my Mac connected to my AirPods because it thought I wasn't using it on my iPhone anymore. And I feel like that's what people interpret as random disconnects, which is correct. Like in reality, in practice, that's what's happening. It's randomly disconnecting. So I would say, number one, disable auto switching on all devices. And this is also important. You have to disable it on all devices. So if you have auto switching enabled on your iPhone, you have to go to Bluetooth settings with your AirPods Pro connected, go to the little eye icon and disable it there. Connect them to your Mac, go to System Preferences, disable it there. So you have to disable it on each device independently, which really sucks. Also, there's been a lot of issues on the Mac specifically. I don't know if this person is talking about the Mac as well, or if they only use iPhone and iPads, but specifically on the Mac, which, as you might imagine, I've had a bit of experience with. The first crop of M1 Max had really
Bluetooth
bad
issues.
Bluetooth issues. Oh yeah,
I still
really
have Bluetooth.
bad.
I've had Bluetooth issues with Monterey on my iMac, which is Intel. Which I don't want to get into that, but yeah.
Yeah, so there are lots of things that have been going on. So first of all, Apple has been reworking the Bluetooth stack on macOS to be more closely equivalent to the one on iOS because historically they've had very different implementations of Bluetooth, and that has caused many issues, and including like security vulnerabilities, because if there's a security issue with a protocol that has a different implementation on the Mac and on iOS, then Apple engineers have to fix it in both. And of course, that can also increase the surface area for security issues. So there's that.
And now the hardware is more aligned, at least with Apple Silicon. The SoC is kind of more similar, I guess. So that might help too.
But at the same time, they are unifying the Bluetooth stack, but macOS gives developers access to the Bluetooth Classic layer, which iOS does not. And Bluetooth Classic is this old Bluetooth so basically the older Bluetooth protocols, non-BLE protocols, that are still very much in use for peripherals like mice, keyboards, trackpads, and audio devices as well. Like your AirPods are a Bluetooth Classic device as well. They're both Bluetooth Low Energy and Bluetooth Classic at the same time. I know it's confusing. So the Mac exposes Bluetooth Classic to developers that are through the I/O Bluetooth API and I/O Bluetooth UI.
Yeah, I've seen that.
And underneath the I/O Bluetooth API, I have noticed that since I think Big Sur, or maybe even it started with Catalina, the I/O Bluetooth API is actually talking to core Bluetooth under the hood. It didn't used to be the case, or at least not.
The so-called
as
classic
prevalent.
layer is actually talking to the newer, higher abstraction level. Is that what you're saying?
Kinda, yeah. Of course, it's using lower level private API for that. Like the API that it uses is not like CB Central Manager or anything like that. It's using other things under the hood that under the hood talk to the Bluetooth daemon, which is what does everything. So core Bluetooth is basically like a thin client on top of the Bluetooth daemon, and it just sends messages to the Bluetooth daemon and gets stuff back. It's kind of fascinating. If you install the Bluetooth logging profile that you can get on the Apple developer website, you can go to your console app on the Mac, and you can install it on your iOS device, And then you can filter by Bluetooth D, which is the Bluetooth daemon, and show all messages. You can see everything that's going on with the Bluetooth stack and what Bluetooth is seeing, all of the devices that it's finding, the characteristics, the services. So you asked about debugging earlier. That's a really good way to debug. Those profiles are meant for Apple to fix issues for you with sysdiagnosis, but you can also do the same yourself if you're a developer. That's really interesting. So with the unification of these stacks, you might imagine it's really complicated. It's a very complex system. macOS used to have multiple daemons that dealt with Bluetooth, and I think there are only 2 now. So all of this stuff, plus the hardware change of going to M1, and I think there had been some changes to antenna hardware as well.
Yeah,
meant that lots of issues cropped up, and I think Apple is still working on fixing all of them. I must say, I feel like it's become a lot better on my M1 Mac Mini. I used to have trackpad issues all the time. Like my trackpad would become choppy, and I would have to like restart my trackpad for it to go back to life. And it hasn't happened in a while. So I think it's
my mouse on
better.
my Mac. My iMac, my Intel iMac has been super choppy lately, and it'll disconnect and reconnect. I've had that happen before. And
which mouse?
I do like it. What? Just Magic Mouse.
Okay. No, I asked because
whatever the latest mouse was.
There are some specific mouse models that have been very problematic. The M1. Not M1, MX Master, is that the name? I think.
Yeah. The Logitech
from
one
Logitech. Yeah. Those have experienced lots of issues, including I have currently. If you use an MX Master mouse and you use AirBuddy, I would strongly recommend not enabling Magic Handoff on AirBuddy because the Bluetooth communication that AirBuddy does for Magic Handoff somehow interferes with the MX Master mouse. And I still believe that it's the fault of the mouse and not mine, because I'm basically just using core Bluetooth as one would normally. No, so that shouldn't be able to interfere with the mouse. But yeah, if you have the MX Master mouse and you use AirBuddy, don't enable that until version 2.5 is out.
No, my wife uses it on her work computer here, and that's Windows. So that's not my problem.
She's safe, at least from that issue.
From that issue, right? Exactly. What was I gonna? I was gonna ask something else about Bluetooth. What have you found is the difference between talking to Bluetooth? We kind of touched upon it, talking to Bluetooth and talking and doing networking. What are some of the big differences?
So I think the difference is that you can think of Bluetooth as lower level. Even though core Bluetooth is a fairly high level API, it's easy to understand. The actual communication, exactly, and not just that, but it's kind of like the difference, maybe not as extreme, but the difference between using something like C and using assembly. You have to tell it everything, every single step you have to coordinate. And every single failure that might happen, you have to deal with it. It's not like with networking where you have URL session and you don't have to like figure out how you're going to get the IP address of the domain that you want to talk to. And you don't have to figure out if the device should use Wi-Fi or 4G to connect to that server. And you don't have to deal with what if the TCP packet doesn't arrive? Like, you don't have to deal with any of that with URL session. But you only have to deal with, did it work or did it not work? And with Bluetooth, with core Bluetooth, you have to worry about every single step of the process. So even if you have a device where you can structure things in a request response way, which you can totally model on top of Bluetooth Low Energy, you can create a higher level API for yourself that looks like URL session, but you will have to implement all of that lower level stuff yourself.
What have you found any good methodologies as far as like encoding and decoding data to and from binary?
I it's something that I feel like is a big thing that's missing on my knowledge
Okay.
regarding Swift specifically. It just doesn't fit my head the way Swift does. All the unraw, safe, mutable, whatever stuff. I really can't wrap my head around it. I should definitely study and work on that a bit more. I'm a bit old school in that sense, because for AirBuddy 2.5, where I am parsing the Bluetooth Low Energy advertisements from AirPods manually from core Bluetooth, I have a C struct that I basically shove the bytes into that C struct, and that's how I parse it, because it's so elegant, right? It's almost like codable in a way, because you define the struct with the right sizes and the right alignment, and everything just shows up in there. And of course, even with the struct that I get from the C-level code, it's still very low level of values like integers and things like that, and I have to do some interpretation on top of it, and that part is all Swift. But I just couldn't find an easier way to parse a sequence of bytes that always has a specific structure that was easier than just shoving it into a C struct. And of course, you have to be really careful without checking bounds and things like that, because that's where crashes and security vulnerabilities can arrive if you don't take care of that. But it's such a simple struct, and there's so little in terms of bytes that I have to deal with, that I just couldn't be bothered with finally learning how to do that stuff in Swift, which I feel like I understand why it's more complicated than in C. There are lots of benefits, but yeah, I still prefer C structs for that.
Yeah, like the way I had seen it done was just going through the array and like getting index ranges and pulling it that way and then reading it out. But that I never thought about using a C struct. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and they map into Swift quite nicely, actually, after you do the reading.
What are so one thing we touched upon with Leah, which was like very early on, was all the new stuff that had come out with nearby interaction. And now we have AirTags that use them. What other like wireless technologies should developers be aware of and how to take advantage of them?
I'm a big fan of what I call on Stacktrace environmental computing, which is this concept of all of your devices being aware of each other. And I have lots of really cool ideas, which I probably will never be able to implement unless I go work at Apple, which I don't plan to. So I think you should definitely pay attention to every wireless technology that's available on Apple devices if you're an Apple developer. The main new one that's still very new and unexplored is the U1 chip. So it's a new technology that can be used for data transfer, but it's mostly used for spatial orientation.
Right. So if you look at the nearby interaction framework, it'll give you stuff like, oh, it's this direction, 5 meters, and like kind of what AirTags kind of tell you on your iPhone, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And I spaced out a bit here. I was trying to remember the name of the technology, and it's ultra wideband. That's the name of the technology.
Yes.
So yeah, you can basically know with a fair bit of precision direction between a device and another device. And Apple is exposing that to us via the nearby interaction framework on iOS. I don't like the way they approached nearby interaction, and I understand why they did it that way, because Facebook is a thing. I guess Meta is a thing. But with the first version of nearby interaction, which I believe was introduced last year with iOS 14, you had to ask for permission every single time you wanted to use nearby interaction.
Interesting. Okay. Which, of course, you don't have to do when you run Find My, but, that's the way it is.
Yeah. And also, you don't have to do when you use other things such as Bluetooth, which you do have to ask for permission.
Right.
And I mean, it makes perfect sense that you have to. Like with Bluetooth Low Energy running, if you have a Bluetooth Low Energy app on iOS, you can gather a lot of data about a given user if you want to, because you can communicate with
Right.
devices that are paired to the iPhone, and like you can know if this person has AirPods and if they are currently next to some device or something like that. So
Well, they were
it is a
used.
privacy thing.
They did add that the permission, like for more like the marketing purposes behind Blue, because we found out, was it iOS 14 where we found out that a bunch of apps were using Bluetooth to basically figure out where you are and if you're in their
Yeah.
store. Like,
Yeah.
I've seen that. Oh, what was the new app? Pikmin Bloom, which is like the Pikmin derivative of Pokemon Go. Oh my gosh, I'm a big fan of Pikmin and I wanted to try it out. And it was asking for Bluetooth permissions. It was asking for location information. And I'm like, okay, I'm not going this route, because I could tell like what it was using Bluetooth for. And I could see, like you said, why they're making you ask permissions with the nearby interaction stuff.
Yeah, I really feel like there's a need to rethink the permission system on iOS a little bit, not to make it more permissive, because we know that there are developers who are going to abuse this stuff. So it has to exist. But I feel like maybe the current approach where you just see a bunch of pop-ups is kind of nasty. And I will say that from a developer's perspective, not a user's perspective, but from a developer's perspective, I much prefer the way Android handles it, which
How do they handle it?
They have, and like I could be wrong, I only wrote like one Android app, and it was a Bluetooth Low Energy app. So basically you have a single system, so you have a unified API where you can ask for any permission. You don't have to, like with iOS, if you want Bluetooth permissions, you have to, by the way, there's no way to explicitly ask for Bluetooth permission. It asks on your behalf when you instantiate a CB Central Manager or a CB Peripheral Manager, which I think is a pretty bad API design, because I might want to have my CB Central Manager instantiated by the time my app launches, but I won't necessarily want to actually ask for permission until a certain point within the use of my app. So we end up having, I end up having in my Swift code optional CB Central Manager properties all the time, because I don't want to instantiate them before it's time. So, but that's another issue. So on iOS, you want Bluetooth permission, you have to do it through Core Bluetooth. You want camera permission, you have to do it through AV Foundation. If you want photo library, you have to use PhotoKits, and so on and so forth. On Android, you have like a single permission framework or API.
Oh, interesting.
Where you can ask for these different types of permissions. And each different API on iOS models, and this applies to the Mac as well, they model their permission in a different way, and the API is also structured in a different way. So in some circumstances, it's synchronous. In other cases, it's asynchronous. And in some cases, the completion is called on the main queue, and in other, it's not. So it's kind of a pain to deal with. And also from the user's perspective, and that way we come back to nearby interaction. So back last year, you had to ask for permission every time. With iOS 15, you only have to ask for permission once, just like every other permission works on iOS. But the problem is that in order to establish a nearby interaction session between two devices, you have to exchange some data in some other way. So you need a side channel, basically. Of course, you can't use nearby interaction for that because, well, first of all, the API of nearby interaction doesn't allow you to exchange arbitrary data. And second, you don't have the nearby interaction session. So it's a bit of a, there's no way to, exactly. There's no way. I already said chicken and egg in this episode. I didn't want to say it again. So, so you have the situation. So how could you do that? So nearby interaction, if you think about it, it's all about devices that are next to each other. It doesn't really make much sense for devices that are not right next to each other. So I wonder what would be a good, efficient way to exchange data between two devices that are right next to each other. Bluetooth Low Energy or maybe multi-peer connectivity, both of which require permission. So for Bluetooth Low Energy, you need Bluetooth Low Energy permission, and for multi-peer connectivity, you need that once to talk to devices on your local network permission, which was added in iOS 14. So basically, if your app wants to use nearby interaction, you have to ask the user for two permissions. And if you don't get the first one, so your side channel one, you have your permission of nearby interaction makes no sense, basically. So I feel like that's really bad design, not just API design, not just developer experience design, but also user experience design. Because if the user gives your app permission to use nearby interaction, it's implicit that they trust your app to talk to nearby devices. So I feel like almost there should be a way for you to, or Apple should group nearby interaction and like automatically give you Bluetooth permission alongside the nearby interaction one, or maybe the multi-peer connectivity permission alongside the other one. Because it doesn't make sense for nearby interaction to exist without the other one. Of course, you could exchange that data through the internet, but that makes no sense. Like, I refuse to do that. It's just ridiculous when you're
in CloudKit and then
exactly. You're doing something that's completely local, completely like you can imagine a completely offline experience with nearby interaction, but you can't actually do it in a practical way because you have to ask for these two permissions and one depends on the other. So yeah, it's kind of a mess, and that put to rest all of my ideas I had for nearby interaction. I actually shared on Twitter a prototype that I made for Chibi Studio, which is my iOS app, where you could point a device to another that has the editor open, and it will like suck the chibi out of the other device with a really cool animation.
Nice.
And it totally works, but I just can't be bothered to ship it because I would have to ask for two permissions in order to do that simple interaction.
It's like what's a Nintendo little toy thing that you can hit
Amiibo?
with? Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of like that. Yeah. You mentioned multi-peer connectivity. How does that stuff work?
So multi-peer connectivity is an API that allows you to talk to nearby Apple devices that are running your app. And it doesn't have to be your app. It can even be another app that uses the same service as your app. And you can advertise. It uses Bonjour under the hood. I don't know if you're familiar with Bonjour. It's a really old technology by Apple. And it's basically a way for devices to be able to learn about each other on a local network without needing to know the IP address of the other device.
Okay.
And this builds on top of many internet standards like STAN and ICE, which are... so STAN is like a way to... It's basically a utility library sort of thing for discovery of devices that can work over the internet as well. But multi-peer connectivity is all about local networking. So basically what you can do with multi-peer connectivity is kind of similar to what you can do with Bluetooth Low Energy. But instead of using the Bluetooth chip, it's going to be using Wi-Fi. And it's basically multi-peer because it's peer-to-peer wireless over Wi-Fi. So the devices don't have to be on the same Wi-Fi network. They don't have to be connected to Wi-Fi at all. If Wi-Fi is on, they can talk to each other. I think he used to be able to use Bluetooth Low Energy as well, but I don't think that's currently happening. I don't think... I think they moved away from that, but I could be wrong. So in general, it's a framework from Apple where you can talk to other devices that are running your app, and you can exchange data between them. It's a lot more flexible than Bluetooth Low Energy because you don't have size restrictions on the data, And it's
Oh,
also a
interesting.
lot
Okay.
faster because it's using Wi-Fi instead of Bluetooth, and Wi-Fi is faster. So you can basically implement something like AirDrop over multi-peer connectivity, because it has basically 3 ways to send data. You can send arbitrary data blobs, so a data object, and you can imagine that with Codable, that allows for custom data to be sent quite easily. You can send resources, so files from a URL, and it will arrive at the other side as a local file URL that you can copy into your app container, just like URL session downloads work. And you can also open like a dual stream between the 2 devices so that you can stream data. So you can think of like streaming video between devices or streaming audio between devices. And it is performant enough that you could totally do that sort of thing. And I have written a wrapper around multi-peer connectivity, which I call Multipeer Kit. And it's basically a nice Swift wrapper around multi-peer connectivity, which is a fairly old API as well, and all delegation based. And what Multipeer Kit does is it gives you a transceiver object that you can configure with several different options, and you can then send anything that's codable between devices, and you can register a closure on the device that will receive a specific type of codable thing. So we'll leave a link in the show notes. And I'm actually currently working on new APIs based on the new async await stuff, which is really cool.
I saw that coming. I just 2 more questions. One was how behind the scenes you just mentioned AirDrop, but like how behind the scenes does Apple decide whether it should communicate with your other device via Bluetooth or via Wi-Fi or via multi-peer or A1? Like, do you know if there's like a methodology to it where it's like, oh, AirDrop, we can see the devices right here, we'll use Bluetooth to send this, or we know the IP address so we can send it via Wi-Fi? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. So the way most of these things work is the way that I'm actually doing it in AirBuddy 2.5, which is in beta right now. So I used to do all of so AirBuddy has this feature where you can send peripherals, mice, keyboards, trackpads between 2 Macs running AirBuddy. And you can also see the battery level of your other Macs that are running AirBuddy if they're nearby. So it doesn't use the internet. It doesn't rely on the internet. It just relies on them being next to each other. And the way I used to do it was using Bluetooth Low Energy. But due to limitations of Bluetooth Low Energy in terms of how much data you can exchange, and also the issue with interference with some devices when you use it a little bit more heavily, which I talked about before, I decided to switch over to multi-peer connectivity. But the problem with that, so multi-peer connectivity under the hood is using something called AWDL, which is, I believe, stands for Apple Wireless Direct Link, which is this Apple technology for Wi-Fi peer-to-peer, basically. And the way it works is basically by multiplexing these peer-to-peer communications on top of your existing Wi-Fi network, not the network, but the radio, basically. And of course, your Mac only has, at least I think most Macs only have one Wi-Fi antenna, which is many times also shared with Bluetooth as well. So you might imagine that could cause issues. You have coexistence issues there. And one of those issues might be, depending on the type of Wi-Fi connection that you currently have, if you are advertising and looking for nearby devices over AWDL, which is what AirDrop uses and what multi-peer connectivity also will use behind the scenes, that can cause problems with your Wi-Fi connection, your actual Wi-Fi connection to your network. So if you're downloading something, you might see a little slowdown on the download because your Mac's Wi-Fi radio and antenna are having to multiplex all of this different data that's happening at the same time. So it's a bit of a problem. So the way Apple does it is they do not advertise or look for other Macs or whatever iOS device using AWDL for this efficiency reason in terms of preserving your bandwidth, but also because it's less power efficient than Bluetooth Low Energy. And the way they do it is by using Bluetooth Low Energy. So basically, when you open the share sheet on your iPhone, or when you open the AirDrop in Finder on the Mac, it starts broadcasting a particular thing over Bluetooth Low Energy that tells nearby Apple devices to wake up their AWDL interface. So they use Bluetooth Low Energy for signaling, but they use Wi-Fi for the actual data transmission.
Okay.
And I'm not entirely sure if AirDrop can use Bluetooth for data transmission. I don't think it can. I think if you have Wi-Fi off, it will tell you that you have to enable Wi-Fi. Maybe used to, but I don't think it does at the moment.
So like if something doesn't show up in AirDrop, it's probably because it didn't get the signal to wake up. It's AWDL, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why also sometimes probably this has probably happened to you. It does happen to me every now and then. I'll open AirDrop on one of my Macs and I want to send something to my other Mac. If I and it doesn't show up the other Mac. If I open AirDrop on the other Mac as well, then it shows up. That's because by opening it on the other Mac also engaged its AWDL interface and started
that makes sense.
Broadcasting. And of course, if you have it set to contacts only and things like that, then there's also a lot of encryption and security stuff going on, and that can also go wrong. But in general, the way they do it is to use Bluetooth Low Energy for signaling and AWDL, so Wi-Fi for data transmission. And that's also what I'm doing in AirBuddy 2.5. I basically solved the problem of the too much Bluetooth traffic by doing the same thing, but I also can't be advertising and looking for nearby Macs over AWDL, which is multi-peer connectivity, all the time, because that will also cause issues, but instead of causing issues with Bluetooth, it will cause issues with Wi-Fi. So turns out radio communications are complicated. and I think of course, if you're an iOS developer and you want to use multi-peer connectivity to do some fun experience with multiple devices running your app, you don't have to worry about this, because on iOS, your app is going to be in the foreground. Multi-peer connectivity does not work in the background on iOS. So the user will use your app. Yeah, maybe the internet speed on that iPhone will be slightly slower at the time that you're doing that experience, which makes perfect sense. But then they'll close your app and that's done. But on the Mac, when you have something like AirBuddy, which is running 24/7 in the background, I have to be really careful with that stuff. And it's funny because the initial implementation of Magic Handoff that I shipped, that I was going to ship with AirBuddy 2, it was like 2 weeks before I was the scheduled release date for AirBuddy 2. I got the bug report that the person was using AirBuddy, and when they had the Magic Handoff feature enabled, the Wi-Fi speed would drop significantly. And you can imagine the panic that I faced. Yeah, so then I switched over. Oh, okay, I can't use Wi-Fi. Let me just use Bluetooth. So that Bluetooth implementation was less ideal than I wanted it to be. And now, over a year later, I figured out a more sustainable way to do it going forward.
Nice. Was there anything else you wanted to mention before we close out?
I think that's good.
Thank you so much, Guy, for coming on this show. Where can people find you online?
I'm on Twitter. I'm at _inside, and you can find my writing at rambo.codes. And of course, you can also get AirBuddy. It's on airbuddy.app.
How often does Stacktrace come out?
every week, every Wednesday. So we're recording on a Wednesday, should go out later today. And you can find that on stacktracepodcast.fm or 9to5mac.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Guy, for coming back on the show.
Thanks for having me again.
People can find me on Twitter at LeoGDion. My company is Bright Digit. Take some time to like and subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube, or if you're on a podcast player, post a review to Google Podcast, iTunes, wherever you're listening. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode. I look forward to talking to you again. Bye.